Welcome back to 40 Videos, everyone. I'm your reviewer, Professor Pretentious, and today we are reviewing the film Together, written and directed by Michael Shanks, and starring Alison Brie and Dave Franco, the power couple from Hollywood. So, this is the thoroughly hyped and advertised body horror film starring this real-life couple, Dave Franco and Alison Brie, as the moderately codependent couple started struggling to admit their animal magnetism in the face of their own life's ambitions. I'll start off by saying I liked this film about as much as I expected. It kept its premise and execution modest while delivering outstanding acting and balanced pulse-pounding moments. It's really masterful with tone. The film weaves so adroitly through varying tones, the shock of the violence, the dramatic build of dread, the poignant character relationships, and the resolving qualities of its humor. It doesn't take on camp or parody or the carnivalesque, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not that kind of movie. Its humor is less from the absurdity and more from the nuances of character dynamics, which really ground us in the horror of the reality of its conceit and bonds us with the humor of the characters. If Cronenberg is the gravely serious body horror and Stuart Gordon / Brian Yuzna's films are the goofy body horror, then Together finds itself nestled somewhere neatly in between. The film is primarily what's called a two-hander in theater. If I were to criticize anything about the characters in the film, it's that they aren't particularly developed and that Franco's character is given much more development. We don't know where Millie, Alison Brie's character, is coming from quite as much, and it's hard to tell what about her contributes to the codependence of the relationship. Despite this, the performance of the two, as well as the performance from Damon Harriman as Jamie, more than cover for the lack of development. The three-person cast here really carries the movie. It resonated with me in a really eerie way because, much like the two protagonists, I am a merged human. Like Millie, I'm an English teacher at a middle school who feels a passion for my work. And like Tim, I'm an involuntarily retired musician who still harbors the band fantasies. It makes me quite attuned to both of their motivations and internal conflicts. To prepare for this review, I watched The Rental, directed and written by Dave Franco, which was similarly adept at style, acting, and cinematography. There was a blandness to the screenplay, which I attribute, however arbitrarily, to Joe Swanberg's middling writing. But where there were scenes of violence in the film, it really proved effective, and its third act ended on a tense, very harrowing note. The more I talk about this movie, the more I appreciated the end of it. Dave Franco is finally emerging from the shadow of his own dependent trauma from his brother James's legal troubles and abuses. His filmography is growing beyond James's, and it's refreshing to see a more measured and less pretentious output from his brothers. I hope he takes the famous sibling route of Joaquin Phoenix rather than, say, Stephen Baldwin. Alison Brie is simply a treasure. I fell in love with her largely from Community, but seeing her in Mad Men and Glow, and then hearing her voice regularly in BoJack Horseman, and again proves that those who are skilled in comedy are really well poised for dramatic acting. I'm also beginning to like Franco, who provides a gripping performance here, and for me, a really surprising one. If I were to have really any gripes about it, it's also something that I don't see as necessarily a problem, but the structure here is very familiar. It's a 3-act film, and it leads into the familiar conventions of horror. A lot of the films I've reviewed recently lean into the simple Sid Field 3-act structure, which is, for horror and thrillers, really effective for building suspense. I'm thinking of Companion, 40 Acres, Bring Her Back, Dangerous Animals, Sinners, Presence. Okay, so I guess all of the ones that I've reviewed. Sure, horror is formulaic, and I'm pretty generous in my reviews, which accounts for these conventions. It's what makes the nuances of the genre more rewarding for us viewers. But the films that stick with me, the ones that provide a variation to the build, make the ride that much more surprising, which is really what we're after in the fear market. I'm thinking of seminal classics like Nope, Hereditary, Barbarian, Goodnight Mommy, and honestly, to some degree, even the Terrifier movies. Now, these films still have climaxes. While they do, the moments of shock and dread don't necessarily follow that long build 3-act structure format. They don't leave the best for last, and so they leave us guessing throughout, which is primarily the feature of horror films. For better or for worse, this is the structure that this film leans into. And like I said with Companion, not every movie has to reinvent the pyramid. That's not what this film's intention is either. While reliance on the common 3-act structure produces a slick and safe 90 to 100-minute movie, it's often at the expense of either character development or plot complications. In this case, it's a little bit of both. So within the first act, you see the character trauma hinted at through a minor story beat, then eventually revealed at the end of the first act. I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much here, but we are nearing this spoiler section. The plot reveal is planted in the second act from relatively obvious source. Again, this doesn't hinder my enjoyment of the movie at all. It just doesn't show as much structural innovation for me. So it does have some really inventive scares, which is what we're after in a lot of this. It does have a great balance of shock, dread, and repulsion, the three horsemen of horror. And it does take a simple, somewhat obvious metaphor of codependence and plays it out really thoroughly, and it traces it with the attention of an incredibly well-focused allegory. And for me, it does what it needs to do. And I do appreciate the coloration of the film, the look of it, the imagery is quite outstanding. And from here, this is where I'm going to start to go into the spoiler territory. So, you ready? Let's spoil some stuff. Spoil some stuff. Again, the scares, while hammered home with a really overt punctuation, this central image of the Rat King is a great marriage of the shock, disgust, and dread fear trifecta. For those not familiar, the Rat King is the section in which he goes up into the ceiling to find the rats whose tails have all knotted together. Rest of them have died. One of the rats survives. This is colloquially called a Rat King in New York City or in other places. And when he finds the Rat King, he finds that one of the rats is still surviving. It produces, hands down, the most haunting and central image of the film, where Tim has found his grinning mother, choosing to stay in bed for days with his father's rotting corpse. She's snapped, and she is clearly showing this grinning image which says, "Hey, what do you expect from me?" And I've seen that they're actually putting it in the more recent final trailers, because it is such a creepy image, and one that really stands out amongst some of these modern horror movies that I have seen. Coupled with the Rat King, a really clear distinction is illustrated here with this scare. His mother chooses to remain with the corpse. However, the surviving rat has little choice beyond gnawing off its tail. And this is the crux of the movie itself. It does take this very clear and stark metaphor of codependence and plays it out quite thoroughly. We do see an allegory which is very neatly and precisely drawn out. Beneath the heart of all romance lies the rapidly beating heart of fear. This is more than simply rejection, but it's really this palpable existential dread of losing one's identity and autonomy. The feeling of two souls merging into one is the obvious metaphor, but it's the paradox of intimacy that causes so much fear. We seem to be able to feel this metaphor as tastes merge, physical space is shared, memories, possessions, languages, perspectives are all shared within a couple. Companion plays with the horror of one person insisting that the other change completely to meet their needs, whereas Together plays with the pull of both sacrificing the core parts of their identity so that neither person really gets to embody their desired self. One of the fears that Together plays into is this feeling of isolation. This is the fear that can keep most people in a relationship, but codependence often creates the ironic state of isolation. Together plays that out where one character is defined by their job, Millie, and the other is defined by their lack of job, Tim. Yet, Jamie's perspective is that the people are always together, yet separate. The film leaves this deliberately unclear, but it seems that through the final merging, though the final merging presents as one person, they can separate, as we see with Jamie near the climax of this film. The film hints semi-subtly at this concept of a relationship as it's starting to die, or just at any points butting up against a fork in the road, of the idea of two people getting under each other's skin. We see that the idea of this type of annoyance and resentment is really a reflection of one's own inadequacies rather than the other person's. As they attempt to create physical distance, the use of sound design creates a really submersive effect. This sort of underwater effect, it reminds me of the one that Talk to Me utilized, where particularly Franco's character experiences a muffling of sound that isolates him from the outside world while also, ironically, trapping him within his own body. And this is through largely Tim's perspective until he has had sex, finally, with Millie's character, in which point she also has been infected with this together urge. And you can see this concept of getting under the skin in the posters, with most of the posters illustrating the varying tones of this film, from beautiful to heart-wrenching to horrific to uncanny, all of those elements of the characters sharing skin. You even have this image of the pulsing cavern that shows up in Tim's dream state in this first to second act that illustrates the connective tissue of the world, the communal experience that comes from the agape form of love. It seems to be the type that Jamie's church was preaching, that we see in their videos, that encourages eschewing boundaries between each other. The rejected version of this final form, as seen by the lost couple in the cave, suggests that any form of resistance will cause this malformation. This is further reinforced by how quickly Tim and Millie are able to successfully merge, because once the two of them officially acquiesce, then this form can successfully merge. One of the primary sources of fear that this movie pinpoints in relationships, particularly codependent relationships, can be guilt as this major driver. We see Tim here feels guilty that he can't be what Millie wants him to be, and Millie feels guilty that Tim has sacrificed a lot for her career. The image of the Rat King is brought really clearly to the surface in a line from her. However unsubtle, it still just further reinforces the metaphor within the story. This one represents how guilt is the main culprit in twisting this concept of free will in a relationship to something compulsory, the thing that ultimately anchors Tim's mother to the bed where his father's corpse lies. It actually creates its own anxiety, its self-loathing, the blame, morphing into a unique form of fear and dread. I feel like they could have played on this a little bit more in the couple's dynamic. Again, a longer film could have taken more space to breathe more life and experiences into this relationship to allow that fear to sink in and settle into the viewer. And they utilize the surface guilt as the pull in the first two acts of the movie. The guilt that we're aware of, in which they are making a large sacrifice and moving to this more rural area to cater to Millie's new career. That surface guilt then somewhat humorously manifests as this gravitational pull that wrenches them through the separate rooms near the third act of the movie. I think the ultimate question that we're going to have as a debate with this movie is, do they give in at the end? To me, the beauty of this film is much like the beauty of Midsommar. Some people do give me raised eyebrows when I say that I think Midsommar is a very beautiful film. And I don't mean from a visual perspective, I mean from a narrative perspective. And this film is very much the same way. You have these characters in a relationship who are somehow constrained. And much like Midsommar, the characters at the end have found some form of acceptance and peace. And to me, that's a really optimistic and beautiful ending for a horror film. In this, the fate at the end is somewhat open to debate. Did they give in and lose themselves, or did they give in to love themselves? I see it like a twist on the Selena Gomez song. I had to lose me to love you. The beauty of the end is that the secondary antagonist of the story, Jamie, is right. Jamie, I believe, unwittingly triangulates, and as a neutral third party often can, causes the couple to air their respective grievances in the scene where the three of them have dinner together. Now, this pulls them closer, as can be familiar in a relationship, as this outside threat often can, but it's only temporary. We see both characters needing ultimately to shatter their egos in order to accept the next phase of their relationship. And for those of us in long-term relationships, the next phase is as the relationship begins to grow, but in this one, the next phase is this together formation. One of the things that I feel like comes into play is Soren Kierkegaard's two most well-known ideas. The first is this idea about love, that love should change us, that if done with fairness and balance, it should engender growth greater than any individual could achieve alone. Tim's deep emptiness comes from the long-held identity ambition that he should be a successful musician. And Millie's emptiness came from the realization of an absent partner unwilling to provide the fulfillment that she needed. They both lacked the identity ambition that the other one had. She had a successful career, and he had a partner who was present and attracted to him. They simultaneously faced losing the thing that they thought was a stable part of their identity. And in this case, Jamie is at the heart of it, creating an unstable love triangle. He even mentions the allegory that shows up inside of Plato's Symposium that I was long since introduced to earlier on in Hedwig and the Angry Inch. This concept of two half people that have been torn apart by Zeus that must find their other part again. But as Jamie points out, this is the concept of codependence, that two people feel like they're not actually whole rather than two whole people being in a relationship with each other. Tim feels threatened by what appears to be Jamie's advances toward Millie, and Millie, being caught by Jamie, threatens to end her career. And they do this quite well. As a teacher, there's nothing quite as career-ending as some form of sexual activity happening at school while students are there. That really sets it up. Mwah, chef's kiss to totally fucking up your career as a teacher. Kierkegaard's second idea relates to how we fulfill that enlightenment of growth through the leap of faith, where we eschew all logic in favor of choosing belief. The film plays directly with this idea, with the penultimate shot showing the last social media post that says, "We took the plunge." First off, the plunge is a pun on the hole they fell into where they found the unholy water to begin with, but it's also Kierkegaard's leap of faith, where the deconstruction of ego is required to reach the next level of fulfillment. The photo shows the house, in this case representing the one body they will now share, and the keys, which relate to the key to reaching this level of growth fulfillment. I think it's no coincidence that the central connection of this merging phenomenon in the story is religion, much like Kierkegaard would say. As a coda to this, one of the things my partner tells me is a phrase that's more important than "I love you." I choose you. Now, we've known each other for almost 25 years now, And choosing one another is more important than loving one another. This is the uniting feature of Kierkegaard and Tim and Millie's new level of fulfillment. A healthy relationship is a series of choices where we choose to grow, where we choose to take different paths, where we choose to compromise. The active choice, where both Millie and Tim are prepared to give their lives for the other, is representative of the higher love. It's presented here as a hyperbole because they both are willing to die for one another. And a lot of times, this is what creates a long lasting, healthy relationship between two individuals rather than two half people, which ultimately will end in some form of resentment or guilt, or will end in the destruction of a relationship. And in this case, this metaphor is held down by Tim's fear of the Rat King, Tim's fear of the mother who just sits in her bed, not knowing what to do. I think a big question is, this movie's been quite hyped, so will it be a summer breakout hit? It's released on a Wednesday. They're usually hoping for it to get some legs. I got to see it about a week ago, and I've been so busy with grading for summer school that I haven't been able to get the review in necessarily. So it is going to be later than the release date. There was a dearth of horror through July this year. I was busy, so I was grateful that there weren't as many horror movies to review, but there were very few. Last year there were a lot more. Horror and kids movies. Both. There was a dearth of both of them, and those really now are the only two types of movies I watch in theaters. However, Together marks the beginning of a flood of new horror movies that are going to come out in August. And though it was pretty hyped up, I'm not sure Together will be the summer sleeper hit that Longlegs was last year. It's not quite as plot driven, it's not quite as propulsive as Longlegs. It's not hitting the adrenaline junkie three quadrants of serial killer, possession, and police procedural. But it is a better movie overall than Longlegs, with more humor and better acting, though not as much gore as hardcore body horror fans might crave. But if you're a fan of the character-driven horror with a really subtle humor to it, I would recommend Together. And for the performances alone, it's definitely worth it. And the ending scene is quite a good ending. It doesn't peter out, and it does leave you on quite a resolved note. Tell me what you think about Together. As usual, like, subscribe, keep watching, share it with your friends, and I'll be back with a fair amount more movies. So, thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye.